Let's start off with the first fact. The first fact is that this case is not what it appears to be on the surface. We have already addressed the fact that this case is very complex. It has lots of moving parts, lots of people involved. According to the narrative, there are countless victims that have been subjected to a number of dynamics over decades. And this allegation related to this enterprise suggests that there are countless perpetrators involved in this particular situation. And again, the situation is extremely complex. Now, you have some individuals who are just hungry for gossip. And so they are insistent that they want names, they want lists of the potential perpetrators, they want to know who all of the victims are, they want to know everything about the case right now prior to any court proceeding. These individuals, by and large, don't understand the way the criminal justice process works, first of all. And second, they don't fully understand the complexity of this case and what is being said by what is not being said. And so we're going to look at a few dynamics related to this case to get a better understanding of what's really going on under the surface of this case. And again, this case is extremely complex and it is reminiscent of the enterprise that we talked about before, related to Rome, related to King James and Company. And so, again, there are a number of moving parts. And one thing that is noted is that there is a suggestion that what we see and what we think we see is not exactly what is going on. And so there is quite a bit of focus on these allegations related to these parties. But what is not being discussed is that there is an assertion that there is money laundering going on. Money laundering has been going on, according to the allegations. And there's also the suggestion that the businesses served as a front of sorts for the money laundering, and that some of these business enterprises served as fronts for criminal activity. And so there's sort of a legitimate front, this sort of facade that's being alleged. And then under the facade, there is an assertion that there were other businesses going on that were not legal businesses. It might appear that they were legal businesses, but according to the allegations, it's not clear that they were legitimate businesses. And again, these are the allegations that are out there. So the allegations have that, again, that Roman type quality. These allegations are very similar to some of the things that went on with the doctrine of discovery, some of the things that went on with King James and Company. It has a very godfatherish quality in terms of the nature of the allegations. And so there are all of these things that are going on according to these allegations that may not be clear on the surface. And so we talked about this whole idea of King James and the enterprise. We talked about the Holy Roman Empire and the enterprise. And ultimately, we have nations that have sprung up based upon these enterprises. Now, these enterprises, just like what is being asserted in this case, what's being alleged, these enterprises had the church as the front. And so the church was the public facing dynamic. And then the things that were going on behind that were the various criminal enterprises. And so, of course, they were presented as being a part of international law, but there really was no international law, and there certainly was not um, an international law that incorporated all of these prior sovereigns. And so, with respect to this particular case, there is a similar dynamic related to the entertainment industry. And so there is the suggestion, the allegation that the industry has served as a front, just like the church served as a front for all of these illicit activities that, according to the allegations, were going on behind the screen or behind the scene. Now, we've looked at a few things from the indictment and we've looked at a few things from the civil complaint from Rodney Jones. And what I've seen in analyzing the different documents is that there is an assertion that there was or there is a business that has products and customers. The business, however, is not presented in terms of the allegations as a legitimate business. There again is this sort of front that is in front of the real business. So that's the allegation. And what stands out first, which is what people are focusing on, is the trafficking dynamic. And so there is this presentation of this business as a pimp of sorts. And so there's this pimp like dynamic that is being described. Okay. And so the entities that are allegedly or have allegedly operated in this pimp like fashion, they have been offering, according to the allegations, a product. And the product primarily being people. Now we have some allegations that address what we examined before, because there was the hint that there were potential child victims, even though it wasn't stated. There was that insinuation, and that's why we addressed the Florida dynamic. And so, what we have in this situation in terms of these allegations is basically this sort of high tech, pimp like dynamic. And so, at one point, there's the suggestion that this is simply based upon gratification, personal gratification. But there are monetary dynamics that are going on with the situation. And so the trafficking does not appear to simply be about gratification. Now, there are some other psychological dynamics that are going on related to the types of gratification. So, all of the gratification does not appear to simply be physical. Some of the gratification appears to be psychological. And we can get into that at another time. But that definitely is what is presented, that there is a serious psychological dynamic going on with respect to the gratification, with respect to power and domination and control, very much like the other Roman enterprises. Okay, so that's what's being described. Inside of that, you also have this narrative about kidnapping, prostitution, and even though there's a focus on these videotapes being used to bribe or extort, there is also the suggestion that there is a pornographic business going on in relation to the other allegations. And so There is this pimp-like dynamic with adults and children in terms of these allegations. And then there's the allegation of kidnapping people. There is this allegation of forcing people into prostitution. And so now you get into this whole labor dynamic going across state lines. Um, you've got the Commerce Clause implicated. You have international law being implicated at this point. Definitely brings in federal jurisdiction because of some of the dynamics that are being alleged. And then with the addition of the narrative or the allegation involving children, um, there comes another question related to what type of pornography are we talking about here with respect to this case. So, again, another complication. And then there are all of these allegations about all of these different people being involved in sexually assaulting people who are victims of this trafficking, kidnapping, prostitution, pimp like dynamic, pornography. And so you have that also going on according to the allegations. And then, in addition to the sexual assault, and that's a big umbrella that encompasses a number of crimes. But in addition to that, there are these allegations of assaults and battery. Now, depending on where you are, assaults and battery fit under both the criminal umbrella and under the civil umbrella. Then, in addition to all of that, there are allegations that in order to keep this enterprise going, that terroristic threats were used. And this includes the use of firearms, the use of arson, and various other dynamics. But there is this allegation of terroristic threatening that has been going on according to the allegations. And now I will tell you, um, terroristic threatening is pretty broad because when I used to work at a juvenile detention center, one of the things that was striking was just about every child that came through there had a charge of terroristic threatening, which was odd, um, but it was prevalent. And so here you see the situation where terroristic threatening is also a part of this whole dynamic. And so then it branches out into something else because there are allegations of not only illegal drug possession, but illegal drug distribution. It's not clear the exact nature of the distribution separate from the allegations of the distribution to individuals who did not know they were receiving these illegal drugs. It's not clear, however, that people were not obtaining these drugs in other ways in terms of this enterprise, these allegations. And then there's another odd allegation about administering something in a fluid form to individuals who were a part of these parties, um, giving them something through IV fluids in order to compensate for or mitigate the damage that came about from the drug distribution and also from the forced prostitution or from the trafficking, from the sexual assaults. And so it looks like there's also an element perhaps of the unauthorized practice of medicine. It's not clear, but there is the suggestion of that with respect to the allegations. Then this case takes on a very interesting turn in terms of the allegations that are embedded in the case, whether we're talking about the criminal indictment or whether we're talking about the civil complaints. There are allegations of intellectual property theft. Mhm. And that some of the kidnapping and some of the trafficking and some of the assaults and some of the terroristic threatening is tied into that these things are tied into the intellectual property theft. That means stealing of the creations of others and the use of coercion and distress and threats, terroristic threats, violence in order to accomplish this dynamic in terms of these allegations. So, again, these allegations are very complex and very confusing, quite frankly, unless what is being suggested is what is really being alleged. That there's a suggestion that the businesses were really a front, according to these allegations, were really a front for all of these illicit activities. So, from the theft to the drugs to the kidnapping, prostitution, trafficking, there is this suggestion that these things came about or they were facilitated by these sort of front corporations, these front businesses, because it's suggested that without these front businesses, people would not have been victim to these other things. They would not have been at risk based upon getting caught up in these other things. And so the businesses were necessary to the entire dynamic. Okay, so that's what's being presented. And then there's the very interesting dynamic related to employment, because also embedded in the indictment and in the civil complaints, there is this allegation that there were civil rights violations, that all of this stuff that we are talking about was or is related to civil rights violations. That because we are talking about businesses and we are talking about, in some instances, people who had employment types of relationships with this business, there is the indication that some of the things that took place were a part of employment discrimination, primarily related to sex. And so there is also the insinuation that there is a hostile workplace dynamic going on or that has been going on. And some of these allegations related to trafficking and kidnapping and sexual assault and terroristic threatening, they are tied to, in some of the allegations, to what is known as quid pro quo, tit for tat. If you give this, you'll get that. And if you don't give this, you won't get that. And you see that dynamic come up in employment situations. And so you can see, based upon all of this, all of these moving parts, that this case is very complex and involves countless people and individuals who are demanding to know the names and the lists and all of that. You don't even really know what you're asking for. Because again, this case appears to involve so many complex dynamics. This is not a simple case. This isn't even something that I've seen before or heard of before with all of these odd parts going on. And we're going to look at some of the dynamics that point to the complexity of this case. Who is actually involved in this case? Who has been investigating this case? That's going to give you an idea of how deep and how serious this case potentially is. So, what we do know is that Homeland Security led the raids on the two homes, the home in California and the home in Florida. And these were done simultaneously. So, this is quite a coordinated effort. And it is occurring, or it was occurring, under the direction of New York. Okay. So, this was a federal raid by a federal executive agency. So that's important to keep in mind. But there were other agencies involved. There is the suggestion that there were multiple agencies involved. And so this case does not look like it is simply about sex trafficking. This case looks like it's about a number of dynamics. And when you consider the various executive agencies that appear to be involved, or in terms of suggestion, were involved, it helps you to better understand what we are looking at here. And so it's not just as simple as release all of the names of all of the celebrities and high powered people who were involved, because we don't know everyone that was involved. They are not presenting that information because this is an ongoing investigation. And so you might see X's, you might see redacted dynamics. And so you might see a number of things that keep you from being able to fully understand what is going on. And so when there is a continuing investigation going on for an alleged continuing criminal enterprise, um, things are not going to be as open as the public might want them to be. Because if there is an ongoing criminal investigation, there is the awareness that there are many victims. In this particular case, there is the awareness that there is the allegation of many victims, many witnesses, many perpetrators. And sometimes the perpetrators or the alleged perpetrators might not even be fully aware that they were involved in perpetrating. They may have also been misled about some things or about the nature of dynamics. And so there are a number of moving parts, yet again, that make it very difficult for us as the public to have a complete handle on what is going on. And based upon the nature of the alleged enterprise, it may not be safe for there to be the releasing of a list of alleged perpetrators, or for the public to be aware of the specific names of all of the potential victims. And now we also have alleged victims that are underage. And so, again, the case is very complex. And so, there's not going to be some simple offering about what's going on like we are in a movie. That's not going to be happening with this case. There are a number of agencies, again, that appear to be involved, and a number of resources that have been enlisted in order to deal with the allegations in this particular case. And perhaps when you think about the agencies that are involved, you can see that this is perhaps far beyond Hollywood. This is far beyond the music industry. We don't know how far this dynamic stretches, We don't know all of the things that are involved in this particular case. And again, there will likely be yet another indictment as this case continues to develop. One thing to be aware of is that because of the high profile nature of the case, sometimes people will be putting things out there that are not real, they are not legitimate. They might be saying things like they are representing people, they are representing victims, and all of that. Take that with a grain of salt. Um, some individuals may be induced into getting into legal relationships with individuals who are claiming to represent victims. And so you have to be very careful about that because, at least in one instance, there's one individual who's claiming to represent victims, but also claiming a history of representing celebrities. So that's a very interesting dynamic and it presents with a number of ethical problems. At any rate, continuing on here, let's look at some of these agencies that appear to be involved in these allegations. And hopefully, this will give you a better sense of the complexity of this case. One thing that is guaranteed is wherever these activities have been going on, local law enforcement has been involved, and perhaps state law enforcement has been involved. There is also the possibility that when state law enforcement gets involved, that the militia might actually be involved. And so that's the National Guard. That happens sometimes. We're not talking about the federal military, we're talking about the state National Guard that is under the control of the governor. But what we do know for sure is local law enforcement has some idea as to what is going on and may have varying degrees of involvement. However, when you have these dynamics going on, there is limited involvement in terms of local law enforcement. And so, therefore, they may not be aware of all of the moving parts um, that the federal government is dealing with. And so, there are a number of investigators that appear to be involved in this case. So, first of all, you have Homeland Security, and then there are New York special agents, and then there is, according to the Justice Department, there is the involvement of the Digital Forensic Unit. Just think for a moment why you would need the Digital Forensic Unit to be involved in this particular case. Okay. Then there is the involvement of the complex analytic and social media enhancement team. Mhm. Why might that team be involved in a case like this? Adding to that, there is the involvement of the high intensity drug trafficking area. Mhm. So clearly, just right there, you know that this is about more than a simple sexual assault case. You know that this is about something more than child abuse. You know that this involves something with a lot of moving parts and a lot of potential additional allegations. And so, in addition to these entities, you have specifically the Department of Justice. Okay? You have specifically the Federal Bureau. You have the agency that deals with firearms. you have the DEA, Drug Enforcement. And all of these entities have access to, if needed, resources from the DOD. Okay, so again, this case appears to be significantly more complex than what is being presented. And so there's a lot of sensationalizing the dynamics related to this case. But the allegations that have been put forth so far suggest that perhaps all of these entities are needed. Perhaps this coordinated effort is needed in order to address all of these moving parts. And so this also helps you to know why, when you look at who the entities are, you know that you're not going to be getting some publicized list of all of the individuals who might be involved in past, present, um, this racketeering situation that has been alleged. You're not going to get all of the information on who all of the potential defendants are, who's being investigated. You're not going to get that information, and with good reason. And so you're not going to know all of the moving parts, but just be clear that there are many moving parts. Now, one of the things that we know, according to the allegations and according to the reports, we know that there is a heavy digital component to this entire dynamic. For whatever reason, um, individuals apparently thought it might be a good idea for them to record all of this stuff that has been going on, allegedly. Okay. Um, and what we have are these resources that are available to do forensic digital examinations. There are resources to repair destroyed devices, to extract data from everything under the sun, to provide expert witness testimony about what has been found in these digital sources, in these cloud sources. You even have Google Earth to provide data about what might be going on. You have spatial intelligence available to provide information about what has been going on. And so, again, there are a number of dynamics that we just don't know about. We can't know about. There are a number of things that are part of continuing investigation. And so, therefore, in order to preserve the case, it's not possible to give the public all of this information. It's not possible to provide the public with all of the investigative data. And one thing that really stood out about this case is that it has been indicated that this case is also being handled by the Office of Civil Rights in the criminal division. So this goes back to some of the dynamics that have been asserted in the civil complaint from Rodney Jones. It goes back to some of the things that were alleged there. It goes back to these apparent allegations by a number of artists about having their intellectual property stolen, about being coerced in terms of their employment, about being physically abused as a condition of employment, about being sexually abused as a condition of employment or as a part of an employment process, interviewing, working, terms and conditions of employment. And so all of these things have been implicated along with the other dynamics related to trafficking, related to sexual assault, related to pornography, related to this whole pimp like enterprise that is being described or that is being alleged. And now we're just going to quickly pick out some things so that you can see these things that are sort of getting obscured in the discussions and in the examinations that appear to be highly important, apparently, based upon the entities that are involved and the entities that are handling the different aspects of these investigations. And so, right in the complaint and right in the report coming from the prosecutor is that this abuse, that in many times is related to employment or labor, that this abuse involves the specific exploitation of women. It even states here that Mr. Combs led a criminal enterprise that existed to, in other words, this is the purpose of the organization. So, this allegation is that the purpose of this organization, or at least one purpose of the organization, is to facilitate the abuse and exploitation of women. So, that's the criminal enterprise. That's the foundation of the criminal enterprise. This suggests very clearly that these other businesses, according to the allegations, are really a front for this dynamic. And there are individuals, according to the allegations, there were many individuals helping to bring this to pass. And so there were, according to the allegations, members and associates of the enterprise. Members and associates of the enterprise. So some people who were not actually a part of the enterprise, some associates of the enterprise, that all of these people were working together to commit these crimes, including sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. So, in other words, Mr. Combs could not do this by himself. Based upon this description of this conspiracy, other people are necessary to the conspiracy. And so this tells you right up front, there will be additional defendants, additional named defendants. This is a certainty. And when you look at all of the different agencies that have been involved, you can just imagine all of the different possibilities in terms of people who might be named as co-defendants in this alleged conspiracy. Now, one thing that comes out in the indictment is sort of a heads up. So, if you fit under this umbrella, heads up, uh, you will be answering some questions. Okay. You are considered a person of interest, significant interest. So, if you are someone who basically ever worked as security staff for Mr. Combs or any of Mr. Combs' businesses, you are probably a person of interest. If you have ever worked as a member of the household staff for any of these homes owned by Mr. Combs, then you are probably a person of significant interest. If you have ever served We are talking about decades now. If you have ever served as a personal assistant, apparently either in the household or in the actual corporate setting, you are likely a person of interest. If you have ever been a supervisor in these related capacities, then you would be a person of interest. And then the catch all, other close associates. Okay, so what's being stated here is that these associates, they are not employees, they are associates. You know what associates are. Something like a friend, but maybe not a friend, but you're associated with them, you know them, you're associates. Sometimes close associates, sometimes not so close. These could be family members, these could be friends, these could be other business associates. Um, these individuals, according to the allegation, they are considered intermediaries. Mhm. So they, according to the allegations, mediated these processes. They facilitated these processes. And there is the indication in the allegations that the conduct of all of these people, uh, it was facilitated by Mr. Combs and assisted by Mr. Combs. And so, one way or another, all of these entities are presented as, in terms of these allegations, as working collectively with Mr. Combs, even if they don't even know each other, even if they've never met each other. He is sort of the central, if you think about a wheel and you have that center thing, that hub, and then you have all of these spokes, and you might even have chain link kind of dynamics. There are a few types of conspiracies that are being alleged in terms of this indictment and in terms of the civil complaint. But the common denominator, according to the narrative, is Mr. Combs. In other words, he is Rome, according to the allegations. He is Rome, according to the indictment. Now, of course, when you have Rome, you have these kings, these monarchs that are under Rome. In that type of situation, there's someone who is above the kings, above the monarchs, in terms of that unholy Roman Empire. And that entity is sort of the spiritual leader over the secular leaders. And so Mr. Combs is presented as sort of like a monarch of this enterprise, with the other allegation that perhaps there's someone bigger. There's someone who is over this whole Roman enterprise, or more people over the Roman enterprise. Just like there is the suggestion that the businesses are a front, there is also the suggestion that Mr. Combs is also a front in terms of these allegations. And so then you see the suggestion that these various other corporate entities that are not under the control of Mr. Combs, that they are associate or allied entities that have allegedly been involved in this entire dynamic, particularly the dynamics related to employment, the dynamics related to intellectual property, the dynamics related to performance. And so there again, there's a lot going on with this case. And there is the assertion, the allegation that all of these moving parts are integral to this underlying criminal organization. Now, what you also see when looking at this case is that some of the individuals that are being addressed are identified as known and unknown. Okay, so in other words, there are some people that they are aware of, but they are keeping the door open for the other people that are going to pop up that are currently unknown. But when the investigation is over, many people who are unknown will become known, whether we are talking about members of the alleged criminal organization or associates of the alleged criminal organization that, according to the indictment, were involved in, among other activities. You see that right there? They are letting you know there are lots of moving parts and there are lots of activities. They are just focusing on these few activities right now in terms of this very general indictment. So they say, among other things, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for the purposes of prostitution, coercion and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, obstruction of justice. Again, they are making it very clear that this is very broad. And so when people start thinking about, oh, this particular crime comes with this maximum sentence, and this particular crime comes with that maximum sentence. First of all, as we discussed before, the allegations span decades. And so it's possible to have multiple instances of all of these things. And so the case becomes even more complex. And then the case appears to involve a number of sort of sub conspiracies. And so sub co conspirators, they might not have been involved, according to the allegations, in everything, but they might have been involved in this discrete conspiratorial dynamic over here or over there, related to one thing but not the other. And so, again, this case is very complex, and this enterprise that is being described is extremely complex. And then there's another interesting notation where it indicates that, but for these employees, these resources, and this influence related to these multifaceted dynamics, it would not have been possible to carry out all of these things. And so all of these various entities were needed in order to pull off this entire thing, in order to run this continuing criminal enterprise according to the allegations. And some people might be asking, why is New York taking the lead? In terms of federal prosecution, New York is what's considered a heavy hitter, a Southern District. The other reason, however, the underlying reason, is that you have federal jurisdiction in this case, and the nerve center for the corporation appears to be New York. It appears that it changed from time to time. And so the headquarters, the center of the business operation was variously in Manhattan and Los Angeles. And so you've got New York and you have California in terms of the corporation itself, in terms of the corporations themselves. Those are the centers for the corporations. And here again, you see this allegation related to employment. And some people might be asking or making all sorts of insinuations about why these things took place and why the people didn't complain and why the people didn't do whatever it is the people on the outside think they should or should not have done. Um, but what is clearly indicated here is that this is an employment for many individuals. This was related to employment. This was related to contract negotiations. This was related to ownership of intellectual property and the alleged theft of such. This was related to that quid pro quo dynamic, wherein if individuals didn't do certain things according to the allegations, they were not going to get their money. They were not going to get paid. They were not going to get their salary. They were not going to get whatever resources they were entitled to according to the allegations. And so, again, you have this theft dynamic that is being alleged again and again and again, and this situation wherein individuals were, according to the narrative, according to the allegation, they were forced to participate in uh, narcotic usage. Now, it's not clear with all of these situations that the individuals thought that that's what was going on. It appears that, according to some of the allegations, that some of the individuals had no idea what was going on. And there is one allegation related to one substance that not only would individuals not necessarily know that they were consuming it, but because it has a transdermal application, meaning going through the skin. And so some individuals, according to the allegations, might have been exposed to those substances not because they consumed anything, which would make things more clear to people. People would be able to note that there was a change after consuming a particular substance. But with this whole transdermal skin contact dynamic, um, it might not be possible for people to always know or make that connection, that correlation with respect to these dynamics. And so that's another allegation that has recently come up, that there is a substance that has been used that was not ingested, or that it had more than one way of being consumed by the body. And then, in addition to the sexual abuse, the sexual assault, there are also allegations that individuals endured assaults and batteries. So they endured being hit, being punched, being dragged, having things thrown at them, having people kick them, um, and that these assaults were sometimes witnessed by other people. And then there's one offering, one example that's being offered. Why is that example being offered? Because it's already a part of public knowledge. And so the investigation doesn't get compromised by using that very specific example in this particular case. And it allows there to be a continuation of the investigation of the other allegations. And it also allows individuals to continue to participate in the investigation without fear, based upon their story being a part of the investigation, being part of the indictment. And so that's why you will sometimes see in both the civil complaint and the indictment, you will see the redaction. You will not be clear about who the victims are exactly. The perpetrators might not be clear because alleged perpetrators, can be tied to alleged victims. And so if you have a person who did something once, for instance, they might be able to clearly recall that one victim, that one very specific victim. And so, in order to continue the investigation without those sorts of things being revealed, one of the ways to do that is to simply not make that public knowledge. The other thing to make note of is the fact that DEA is involved in this investigation. And so, again, this is bigger than the discrete allegation related to sexual assault. This is bigger than the discrete allegation related to kidnapping. This is bigger than the discrete allegation related to arson. This is bigger than the discrete allegation related to intellectual property theft. This entity that has been involved in the investigation, their focus is disrupting major drug trafficking organizations. Okay, so this lets you know that this is more complex than what people are led to believe. And because of this type of dynamic, it makes it impossible for all of the information to be released to the public so that people can digest it and have gossip on different sites discussing all of this. It's just not possible based upon, again, the complexity of this particular case. And as we've already addressed, there are these terroristic threat allegations that are embedded in the indictment. And so, what has been noted is that violence has been used in order to keep this alleged enterprise going. And this violence has included threats of violence, actual violence, the use of firearms, in addition to the physical and sexual abuse. And finally, there is the insinuation that this thing that has been created allegedly by this criminal enterprise, this thing called the freak off, that this thing is its own business product. And so the way that it is presented is that just like prostitution in general, that the freak off is a resource that is provided according to the allegations. And it is a resource that is provided to individuals who want to partake in the resources that are provided as a part of the freak off. And so the freak off, according to the allegation, um, it involves all of this abuse of persons. It involves these forced labor dynamics. And people are wondering what forced labor? Well, if people are being forced to participate in the freak off, and there are resources that are attached to the provision of the freak off, and people are benefiting financially or in terms of power, influence from providing the freak off, then you have individuals who are not voluntarily working. You have individuals who are a part of a prostitution dynamic, whether they know they are a part of it or whether they found out later that they were a part of it. That's what you have going on in terms of the description of the freak off dynamic. And so the freak off becomes a product basically for sale. And the individuals that participate in the freak off are not always willing participants. The individuals who are participating in the freak offs sometimes don't even know, again, that they are participating in these freak offs. But somebody, according to the allegations, somebody is benefiting from these various individuals participating in or being a part of these things called a freak off. So the freak off, again, is that business product that is being provided. We don't know all of the people that have bought into the freak off dynamic. We don't know all of the people who allegedly participated in orchestrating these alleged freak offs. We don't have that information. We don't know all of the individuals who have been victim to these alleged freak offs. But the freak offs themselves are a part of an employment dynamic. And so there you have the Office of Civil Rights. Yet again, you have these employment discrimination dynamics that are going on because, according to the allegations, not everyone is required to participate in a freak off in order to have a job with the Combs enterprise. And so, for some people, apparently, in order to maintain this business relationship, according to the allegations, the condition of that employment or the condition of that business relationship is to participate in these various illicit activities that involve significant assault, significant battery, um, in these particular activities. And so, again, when you look at all of these dynamics, you see that this case is a lot more complex than it is being presented as. You have a number of individuals that are talking about the case in ways that are sensationalizing this particular situation. But the situation is very complicated. This situation is very problematic on so many levels. And so, what people probably need to do is be somewhat patient in terms of how the case is developing, how the case is evolving, how the case will be presented over time, and in terms of just getting general information about the investigations, because again, there will only be limited information provided about the case in anticipation of litigation. And also, it's important to keep in mind that certain things can't be out there because then you get into some weird dynamics with respect to, can people even get a fair trial? Okay, and so if too much information gets out there, it becomes increasingly difficult for individuals who are being accused to actually get a fair trial in this particular situation. And what you don't want to happen is, even though people have formed all sorts of opinions about guilt and innocence and all of that, what you don't want to have happen is for there to be serious miscarriages of justice in this particular case. And you don't want people getting caught up in something wherein they actually might be a victim in the situation and they end up on the other side of the situation. You don't want individuals to get caught up in this situation and not be able to have the justice that they need, because some individuals don't have the resources of Sean Combs. They can't hire all of these high powered attorneys in order to extricate themselves from this, what looks like a web at this point. They are not able to do all of that. And so some individuals might get caught up in something that, in terms of justice, they might have a harder time receiving justice in these cases. And you also don't want to have a situation wherein victims are even further victimized because all of their information is out there. Okay. And so, and this includes children. And so that's something that we also do not want to have happen with respect to this case, because not only do you need justice for alleged perpetrators, but you also need justice for alleged victims.